Welcome to Music Row Dealmakers, where we explore our world of making deals from Nashville's famed Music Row, in the heart of Music City. We are the Dealmakers, from composing to closing. Now, here's your hosts, Barry Neil Schrum and Dennis Disney.
Greetings to all of our mutual deal makers out there. Dennis and I are glad to welcome you to our 12th episode of Music Row Dealmakers, from composing to closing. Available wherever you listen to podcasts. Hit that subscribe button down there and share us on all your social media. We really appreciate it. We've got over 800 followers now, and we're happy for that, and that number just keeps growing. So help us reach 1,000, would you? I'm Barry Neil Schrum, and this podcast, as always, comes to you live from Music Row in Nashville, Tennessee, from the Schrum, Disney and Associates law offices. You can find out more information about the firm at shrumdisney.com, or more information about this podcast at musicrowdealmakers.com. As always, Dennis and I encourage you to interact with us. Call us at 800-DEALMAKER, that's DEALMKR, if you have one of those old-fashioned phones with numbers on them. If you don't, it's 800-332-5657. Or send us an email at questions@musicrowdealmakers.com. So in today's episode, we are continuing discussion we started last episode. We looked at the Tim McGraw case involving the term provision of the Holy Grail of the exclusive recording agreement. And we looked at the Hank Williams contract involving the exclusivity clause. So today we're going to continue that discussion and look at some of the important terms in the Holy Grail, some of the critical provisions that you want to pay attention to. But before we do that, we don't want to forget our founding sponsor, Shure Microphones, for providing all the equipment and support that we're getting from them. Ryan Smith over there in the Nashville office, we thank you, and I know Dennis thanks you. So, Dennis, let's talk about this exclusive recording agreement, some of the provisions. What provisions are we going to be looking at today?
Well, first of all, we need to put in a crowd roar sound effect. When you say coming to you live from Music Row. Last episode, you couldn't find that.
So for friends and all you listeners out there, I finally found my wah-wah. And
Yeah, well, okay.
I didn't want to miss the
It
opportunity.
only took you 6 decades, but yeah.
I don't know if it took me that long. But there you go.
Oh, my gosh.
So
little nutty here toward the end of the calendar year, shall we say?
well, and we this episode will be coming out just after Thanksgiving. Dennis and I are getting prepped for that, so that's one reason we're a little bit antsy. But we hope all of you listeners had a great Thanksgiving holiday. It's one of my favorites. I know. I think probably one of Dennis's as well. We get to see family and sons and daughters and just all kinds of good friends. That's what it's all about, isn't it, Dennis?
It is that and the turkey
Well,
and
yeah,
the football.
can't forget the turkey.
So where are we jumping off today?
Jumping off. Well, I think we're going to start with, what is it? What is a recording contract?
You know what? Seriously, this is what I tell artists of all ilk, every strata, but especially the new ones. A recording contract is a means to an end. That's what it is.
Yeah.
And by that, what I mean is the artist has to, and it's their sole responsibility to say, this is where I want to go. The label can't tell you that. If they try to, you will never get there because they can't give you your vision. They're doing it right, in my opinion. They're signing you because of what you're bringing to the table and your ability to articulate at some level what that vision is, and then they can come alongside that and go, yeah, we think we can help you get there, and we'll be rewarded in that process. So labels and or managers can help you refine it, help you sometimes define it, yes, but not give it to you. And so you have to decide, where am I trying to end up? And at that point, then you can then look at it and say, okay, what kind of contract do I need to enter? Or do I need to enter one at all? But since we're talking about recording agreements now, it really is, where am I trying to end up? In what time period am I trying to get there? What do I bring to the table? What are they asking me to give up?
Mm-hmm.
And what are they bringing to the table? And what am I asking them to give concessions on?
Yeah, I like that. Couching it in the phrase of a means to an end is sort of putting it in perspective, and that's something. At least we. Let me back up a second. We call it the Holy Grail, you and I, and to a certain degree it is, and over the past 3 to 4 decades, particularly in the 90s and the 80s, it was the Holy Grail, and an artist would do anything to get that recording agreement. After the industry sort of paradigm shifted from physical product to streaming, the gatekeeper role of the label, and the reason we call it the Holy Grail, lessened. It diminished. And so now it's important that anybody seeking a recording agreement understand it's only one of the ways to get where you want to go. And I think when you just talked about vision and what do you want out of your career, I think that's something that young artists are coming around to and they're starting to have that vision. And if you don't have that vision, you're exactly right. You're not going to get there. And a label's not going to get you there. And an entertainment attorney's not going to get you there. You've got to have that drive. We talk here at Strum Disney about a passion for the arts and a passion for the law, and we do that for a reason, because you and I share a passion to support those kinds of people. But in turn, they've got to have that passion for what they do.
Well, exactly. It's easy, I think, for a lot of artists to say, I want to be a star. Well, that has no definition to it.
No, it doesn't.
So put some definition around that. And by definition, I mean put some specifics. And then we can help you determine whether that's commercially feasible. The label can, managers, attorneys can help you make some of those decisions. And at the same time, I will hasten to add, oftentimes the objective is very modest and everyone rallies around that. But then you quickly see after a period of time, you go, wow, our vision was too small. This can go even further. But you have to have something you're trying to hit. And you have to identify that in the terms of how long am I looking to get there? How long is it going to take me to get there? What resources do I need or do I already possess to help me get there? I just think it does a disservice even to parents to say, oh, you are so good, you're going to be a star. And I'm sorry, that's just not good enough. You have to get real people around you who understand the commercial nature of our business and then can help put plans together to hopefully get you where you want to go. With all that said, it's still a crapshoot.
Oh, it's always a crapshoot. But the important thing about where we are as a society in this industry, in the music industry, is that there are so many pathways now that you can choose. The exclusive recording deal with a major conglomerate like a Sony or an EMI or someone of that ilk, that's not necessary to make a really good living as an independent artist. You can tour, you can make money, and you can do things without that exclusive pathway. Go find an independent record label. Find someone who shares your passion, right, and is willing to support you in that passion.
At the end of the day, and I used to use this calculation with a lot of artists as we were trying to build their merchandise sales in particular and their website sales in particular. I said, you don't need 1 million people to buy your stuff. You would love that. Don't get me wrong.
Oh, it'd be great.
But to make a really good living, you need about 1,000 people who will spend $150 a year with you.
Yeah.
That's 150 grand right there, not counting cost of goods. And then, you can grow up from that. Well, most indie artists, not that I'm not going to say it's easy, but they don't have a hard time really aggregating 1,000 people.
No, not
And then
at
it
all.
just becomes multiples after that. Now, you may not have the fame, you may not be getting radio airplay, but if the idea is to do what you love to do, and as Walt Disney, my distant cousin, actually he is, but as he used to say, do something so well that people will pay you to see you do it again. So if you're doing that, you're doing what you love, in this case, in the music world, you're writing and performing and doing things. Obviously, it's got to have a commercial element to it. You can make an above average, solidly middle income living doing what you love to do with a fairly modest audience pool to pull from. And then if you happen to hit a couple of, home runs with a song or a tour or something like that, then it goes, almost quantum from there, so to speak. So it is that idea of what do I want to do, and make sure that you love doing it. The types of songs you perform, the style you perform them in, the types of venues you perform in, et cetera. And you can make it work and do very, very well financially with it. I was just looking today, of all things, I'm working on a catalog sale with a client, producer client. So I'm going back through some old records over the last 3 years. And I'm looking at, for him, his sound exchange royalties. Just that. And this is not a household name producer, but he's a really good producer. And he's got a lot of projects out in the marketplace. But his sound exchange, which is the performance royalties paid to artists and record labels
For sound recording.
for sound recording performances, and he only gets a portion of that because he was producing, and the artist has to do a letter of direction and say, hey, out of my portion, X% will go to the producer. So over the last 4 years, and we don't have December's numbers yet, but over the last 4 years, he's done $200,000 himself.
And that's a good living.
Now, and that's just on that. That doesn't include producer royalties, any of his song publishing royalties, his producer fees on top of that. The artist, which means the artist who only effectively gets 45% of sound exchange. 50 goes to the label, 5 is held by sound exchange, 45% to the performing artist. So if you scrape off 15, 20% to give to the producer, do the math for the artist. Again, not necessarily household name artists, but in their genre, known to a pretty good audience. I mean, they're making at 200, and that was 20,000. They're making somewhere in the neighborhood of about $400,000 to $500,000 over that same 4-year period before they get into record royalties or record advances or touring income, merchandising sales. So to your point, you can be just modestly successful and live like a top 5%er in income. You really can.
Yeah. So, to kind of rein this back in toward the Holy Grail, as we call it, the exclusive recording agreement. What this does to that leverage and negotiating a deal like that is it puts it in a different perspective, to get back to that word. These days, with the ability, like your client, the producer client, to make a couple of $100,000 or more just doing what you love, you don't need this exclusive recording agreement anymore. So that puts the artist in a slightly better negotiating position when it comes to some of these terms. So again, you may or may not need the exclusive recording agreement. If you don't want to be a superstar, if you don't want to be, one of those A-level celebrities who we see everywhere, if you're happy playing music, producing music, and reaching a modest audience who's, as you say, is willing to spend $150 a year, you can make a good living and you can live a life that you enjoy and that you have fun with. So with that said, let's look at some of these elements of an exclusive recording agreement. Let's talk about the term. We looked at that with McGraw last year a little bit, our last session. So maybe we skip over that one, but there are other things that are in the recording agreement, like the delivery commitments, certain restrictive covenants, recording budgets, recoupment, artist advances, clauses dealing with that, and the royalties, deductions, ownership of the sound recording, and other fine print. And if you're considering this from that perspective of, hey, the label can help me, then how does that affect how we negotiate those? Would you agree with that, Dennis?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And every label is going to be stronger in areas than another label. And people think the majors have everything sewn up incredibly well in every channel of marketing and promotion and services, and not necessarily so. Everybody is a little bit different. And then, of course, you come down to the indies who have fewer services they can provide, but they also provide some other opportunities the majors can't. So, but I did want to touch real briefly. I know we talked about term last time, and then we can go into delivery commitment. What I'm seeing a lot of right now, especially from the smaller labels, is that the term is actually tied to the delivery commitment. So instead of it being a term of years, it's a term of minimum delivery.
Right.
And it becomes a bit of a challenge how some of this gets worded sometimes. I was dealing with a contract last week, and I had to tell the client, and we tried to redline this out. I haven't gotten it back from the label yet, but I said, look, the way this is worded right here, potentially, it is 4 years until you get to your first option because of the way they've written the timing. And it's all based upon how many masters, single song recordings, you're supposed to deliver within a particular time period. And if you hit that mark, then they get to extend the option. If you miss that mark, and there was some other language, I said, long story short, they want one guaranteed period plus 4 options, just to add it up. That's 16 years if they pick up every option. That's not much of an exit ramp for you if things aren't the way you like it. They may love it.
Right. But if you're one of those independent artists that we've been talking about that has chosen a different path, then that would warrant, if they're using this vestigial, shall we call it, language from the physical days of, the term being tied to the delivery of a physical product, and then the next delivery happens after that, and like you say, it can extend. And that was the problem in a McGraw that we looked at in the last episode, right? He had delivered what he thought was the full delivery commitment. Now, he had been with Curb for 20 years at that point, and to your point. And so under that contract, he said, okay, I've delivered. But they said, no, you don't, because of these things. And that was the dispute in that contract. So to me, that's language that they built, that the labels built into the contracts back when delivery of product was important, and timing of that delivery was important because you had to get it into the stores before the Christmas holidays and before all of the holidays and when people bought music. And if you didn't do that, you missed the window, and then you had to wait until the next year. So it was important at that time. I would argue, and I think this gives the artist some leverage, that that's not as important anymore, because music is streamed now. You can release music at different times. Unless you're releasing Christmas music, the timing of it is not as important.
It's important. I can attest to this because of what we do. And more recently, when I was at the management company for 8+ years, the timing still has real importance.
Right.
I definitely agree with you that because of streaming and the way people consume, they consume it so much differently than the old days.
Right.
The old physical days. But there still is a timing factor that comes into play. It could be everything from what's happening in the market and what big albums are coming that's going to suck all the oxygen out of the room and all the listeners away from your track because they're all flocking there, to is there a big seasonal thing that you do have to watch out for a little bit, et cetera. You don't want to necessarily be dropping a non-Christmas record between November 15th and Christmas necessarily, even now, because it's just not going to get the listens that you want it to have. And then the timing of the subsequent releases, even if you're doing singles, masters, I've seen everything from, hey, we're dropping 4 over a period of 3 months, and then we'll drop the full album, to we're not doing albums anymore, we're going to drop one every 2 weeks. And that really just depends on your strategy, right? But there is a timing aspect to that is true. In terms of what that means for a term and a minimum delivery, that's where the language really gets incredibly important in the contract. This one contract I was mentioning said that you were supposed to deliver 12 tracks within the first period. And if you do that within the first 18 months, then we have the option to extend the period before you deliver your next batch to us for another couple of years. And I looked at that and went, well, that's, by the time I added everything up, I'm like, you're pushing 4 years before we even get to the second option.
For your first term.
And so then they modified the language and said, well, if it's 12 tracks, but we release 8 of them within the first 18 months, then we get to extend. Well, hang on. So, it's like, that still doesn't work for me because, again, the powers with the label that could still extend this contract way beyond what I'm comfortable with. And that's what I kept telling the client. They ultimately said, well, we can live with that. And if it's not working, I think both of us will just get out of it anyway. They won't pick up the option. And that is true, but it's not guaranteed.
That may be true.
It could be working for the label and not for you, and they just pick up the option. But so anyway, all that to say, this trend now to the term is tied to delivering the minimum delivery commitment. Sorry, the minimum delivery commitment, and that commitment is structured to be delivered in single songs, not just in a full album. Back in the old days, the language was, you will deliver us one album consisting of a minimum of 10 tracks with no more than maybe 14 or 15. Great. Minimum is 10, but it's got to be a full album. Well, now it's not even that with a lot of these deals. It's just masters, single song masters.
Well, and that's the negotiating leverage that I'm talking about. I think in contexts like the contract you were talking about, the artist has more influence to say to the label, look, we understand that there has to be deliveries, certain number of deliveries, but why do we have to attach it to a bundled product anymore? It's not bundled anymore, it's streamed. And that gives a certain negotiating strength to the artist position, in my mind.
It does, but, again, some of the newer contracts, they're not tying it to a bundle. They're just tying it to deliver this minimum in this period of time.
Right. And my point is it's sort of a shifting.
It's very much a shift.
Understanding of that term. And that is an example of how things evolve according to the zeitgeist and how people consume music.
And interestingly, the way they produce music, because there's economies of scale to go in and record a batch of songs at one time, at least get the basic tracks done. Meaning we're going to, if we're having to pay studio rental and hiring musicians, we're going to come in and over 2 or 3, 4 days, we're going to knock out, 6 to 10 songs. Why? Because I can get a group rate. I get economies of scale in my production costs to do that, right? Mm-hmm. Under the contract, though, you don't have to deliver it that way. This client I'm talking about, I said, what is your intent? Our intent is to deliver them 12 songs all at one time. I said, okay. If that's your intent, and that's allowable under this contract, you don't have to do it that way. But if that's what you're doing, then we can probably deal on how the term of this needs to work, because you're not stretching 10, 12 tracks over 18 months to deliver. You're doing it all at one time. I said, that'd be fine. Again, that's the way it used to be done. But these labels, even if you do that, are not obligated to release an album necessarily. They can release it as individual masters.
Right. Well, another example, I think, of how an independent artist needs to perceive these things is the concept of recoupment. Under the traditional exclusive recording agreement that we're kind of talking about, the typical, like in the 90s, for example, when people were selling hundreds of millions of physical product units, artists were getting seven-figure advances. And we're talking life-changing money. That doesn't happen as much anymore. But even in those days when they were getting that life-changing money, all of that was recoupable. Dennis, spend a little time telling the audience what that means. Does that mean the record label is like a bank that you have to pay back in due time, or what?
In many respects, yes.
Yeah.
And the label people will tell you that's the way they think they get treated sometimes, is just the bank. But it's really more than that. First of all, the label's fronting that money, their investment in that, whether it's fronting the recording costs or fronting an actual advance against your your artist royalties. That's an investment on their part. And in my opinion, you need to have a certain floor amount just to record a great record. You just do. I'm sorry. You can't have a synthesizer, a podcast mic, and garage band and create hit records unless you just are fluking out on something. It doesn't happen. It requires great skill, great musicianship, great equipment to get the sonics and everything correct. So it takes money to do this, right? And for them making the investment, they're putting skin in the game, the label is. So then that generally, I say generally because it doesn't always happen, but generally means, hey, if we're investing, it's in our selfish best interest to then support that every way we can to get our money back because we have put out the money. And the way these contracts are written, with some exceptions, is that those monies are recoupable, meaning that, yes, the label gets to recover those costs, the recording costs and the artist advance costs, before they pay you another royalty. Again, the artist royalty advance is an advance on your royalties. So that's like saying, hey, I'm going to make $100,000 over the next 5 years with my record royalties. Yeah, guess what? We just gave it to you when you signed the contract. So until we get that back, you won't see another royalty check from us until we get that part of it back. Well, and the recording costs back, typically. And now it's always been this way. They throw other stuff in, as you know, marketing and video, tour support and
Well,
stuff.
in the old days, there were the consultants across the country that programmed the radio. And at some point in history, they were involved with the mafia, but that's in the old payola days. But
So we think.
so we think, maybe it still happens. But there's 6 or 7 consultants across the country, and when they wanted to roll it out, say in the Northeast, they would hire that consultant at a cost of somewhere near, $200,000 a month for 6 months. And so you're into the label again, because that's recoupable.
Yes.
Anything they spent on your career was recoupable. If they made a video to put on MTV in those days, that was recoupable. And those often cost millions of dollars for production. And so anything that they spend on the artist was recoupable. So
Now, with that, there is varying percentages. It started out, a lot of that was 50%, 50 recoupable.
yeah, but
And that's
that was a long time
that was a long
ago.
time ago. Now, most of it is 100% recoupable.
Right.
When it comes to videos, because videos can be monetized, that doesn't sting as much for the artist, because eventually that can get an earn out. You can see royalties from some of that, of course. And tour support is not unreasonable necessarily if a label's giving you tour support to help pay for your bus or production costs or some of those things.
Lights
Yes,
and
they're
sound.
recoupable,
Yeah.
but otherwise you would have to go to the bank and get a loan that is paid back with interest. And this is where the recoupable brilliance is for the artist. Your recording costs, the advance on your royalties, any of those third-party costs that are, quote, recoupable, there's no interest tied to that for the label to recoup it. and recover it. And B, if you depart the label before it's recouped, 99% of the time, some contracts are a little different, but 99% of the time, you can just walk away. If they say, we're not going to do another record with you, well, I still owe you $500,000 in recoupables. Yeah.
Yeah.
But we can keep selling your product and we can earn it out over time.
Well, and that ties into the ownership of SR that we'll talk about in a minute, ownership of the sound recording and the reasoning for that. But that's a good point that when the agreement term ends of its own accord, whether the label says we're not renewing or whether you've delivered everything, that recoupable amount stays with the label as an account in your name, and any royalties generating by the ongoing sales of your product go back to pay that back. Just one example of that is when I represented Leon Russell, may he rest in peace. Leon was the hardest working guy I knew, but Leon, the day he died, was still unrecouped in the millions because of all the monies he had been advanced over the years. So it does still sit in their accounts and their records, even when they merge and acquire other companies and, you're on doing your own thing. That product is still paying them back, and you likely will never see any of the royalties.
But the difference is you don't have the bank attaching your house and
that is an
an
important difference, and that plays to what we were talking about earlier. If you're an independent artist, now you're going to be looking at an exclusive record deal a little bit differently, because in the past that was your only path to distributing records and becoming a musical recording celebrity. Now, if you can find that base of people who will spend money on your product, your question becomes a different one. Do I want to get the advance from the label in order to make my career go further? And am I willing to give up certain things in order to get that?
Exactly.
So it's a different equation.
It is a different equation. I mentioned last time I tend to be more of a time value of money person. And because I think if they're giving you six figures, multiple six figures, seven-figure advance, there's a whole lot you can do with that now, as opposed to earning that out through royalties over time. But you have to keep in mind that I got my royalties, I received them way early. I got paid up front. And some artists and creatives get a little frustrated that they're not seeing the royalty checks in their mailbox. And I've had to remind more than one, that's because you got it 2 years ago or 3 years ago. You haven't earned it out yet.
Yeah, most artists have short-term memory when it comes to that
Yeah.
big advance that they got. I remember in the 90s, some of these country acts, shall we say, you got the big advances. They go out and buy the big-ass truck. I'm sorry, big beep truck, and they buy the big house for their mother, and spend the advance on all these short-term things or, immediate satisfaction things. And then all of a sudden they're like touring and they're like, well, geez, I can't afford to go to McDonald's. How am I a star? How am I a recording artist, celebrity, and I'm not making any money? Well, you got your money back 2 or 3 years ago when you spent it on the truck.
Exactly. And I've heard so many complaints over the years. Oh, I'm still unrecouped and my label is so bad because I'm unrecouped. And I have to say, well, first of all, it's how much did they advance you?
Yeah.
And let's take a look at it from that perspective first. And then as I'm writing into contracts these days, when it comes to those ancillary recoupables, marketing, et cetera, the label, we're putting in contracts, the labels can't run amok on that. They can't just run up the cost because I'm sorry, labels are still making money and making a lot of money. But the artist has every right, if they're going to recoup that, they have every right to know and speak into how is that money being spent that you're getting ready to spend for my third-party publicity, my outsourced radio promotion, et cetera. And am I comfortable with that amount, knowing that it's adding to my recoupment? Because I do want to get back into getting checks every month. Sure, everybody wants to start making more money than you just were paid. But if we can help the artist find that balance between get a really good deal for you that allows you to do what you need to do and want to do and live the lifestyle that you would like to live, while at the same time having it structured so that if you're successful, you also get benefit, over time. And we can help work with the label, not as a partnership, because that, I don't want to use that word, but with that attitude of being partners. And nobody just runs off and does their own thing, because then it doesn't work for anybody. But
Well, I will say that the labels these days have taken, in their defense somewhat, have taken a different approach to some of these types of deals. If you are an artist who's making a great deal of money, they will become somewhat like a partner in that they say, okay, here are the services we offer. We offer distribution, we offer, marketing, maybe tour support. And these days you have a little bit more flexibility as a successful independent artist to pick a la carte what you want the record label to help you with.
Sure. And I will say the old adage used to be, go become a star and we'll make you a bigger star.
Right.
In some cases, they were finding also people that, just like Trisha Yearwood was a background singer. That's how they found her originally. And so there are ways to find it. But today they put so much emphasis on social media presence. What's your TikTok numbers? Have you had a song or two that went viral on TikTok or Instagram or something? And those things are weighing heavily into the types of deals and advances that you can get now. I just read an article, and I can't remember the person, but it was some influencer, not even an artist, just a social media influencer that signed with somebody for something. And it was a $3 million deal, $3 million package. And it might have involved podcasting and some other stuff. But it's $3 million for social, because they have strong social media presence. So if you're an indie artist and you can build that social presence, that gives you so much more leverage. Even when I was in management, we would find an artist that we thought was really interesting. That was our first question. What are your socials like? And then if we looked to sign them and we went to talk to a label, we knew their very first question, what are their socials like? Mm-hmm. So that's just become the norm now. So you got to have that presence, part of that equation. And you're right. The stronger that is, absolutely the more leverage you have.
Yeah, without a doubt. And that shows up in places like the royalties. And so we've talked a little bit about recouping those royalties and the advance going against them. Let's talk a little bit about what the royalties were in the traditional deal and how those have evolved to the point where we are now. Back in the day, in the 90s, again, a typical royalty was somewhere between 12 and 18%. Did you ever hear back in those days anything higher?
No, and I've heard of it lower.
Yeah.
I've seen 10 and 12 back in the day.
Yeah.
12 to 18. 18 was probably on the top end. I saw a lot of deals that were 12, maybe 14 or 15, and then had kickers, escalators. If you hit certain either
levels,
units or dollar volume thresholds, they'd add another point on anything above that.
Right.
Then another point after you hit another threshold, that type of thing. And so
or a half point.
Or a half point. And so eventually you can look at it and go, yeah, I've got an 18-point deal. Yeah, but you started at 14. You had these milestones to work your way up.
Well, but and too, in those days when you had, let's say you had an 18-point deal, right? That doesn't mean the artist is getting 18 points, because there was something called an all-in royalty rate, which means you're paying your producer 3 to 4 points out of that 18%, exactly, which means you're only getting 14%.
Exactly.
And then when you start talking about foreign sales, right? Then there was this whole structure of, wait a minute, well, if we're selling it in Canada, we're not getting quite as much, and there's different taxes up there, so we're only going to pay you 85% of the royalty rate when you get to Canada. And oh, by the way, over here in Japan or somewhere else, we're only going to pay you 65%, or maybe even 50% of your royalty rate. So all of a sudden, your royalty rate gets down to like 5%.
And in the States, if they put it at budget price, midline price, or budget price,
I didn't even talk about that. Yeah,
your percentage dropped. It would be 75, 80% of what your normal rate was if it was a midline price product. If you got the budget price, it dropped down to maybe 50 or 60% of your normal royalty rate, to your point.
And for those listeners who don't understand what a mid-priced album is, you've never walked into a record store because there aren't any record stores anymore. And so that's what we're talking about. Because, back in the 2000s, when record stores started disappearing, I'd walk in, Dennis, you probably had this experience, and all of my favorite music was over in the sales bin, 50% off, and that's what you're talking about. That's a budget priced
Yeah.
album or a fire sale kind of
Well, they
thing.
had, having worked with labels and distribution, a method to the madness. There really was, based upon volume discounts and other stuff you would give to stores. But essentially, a budget price was, midline price was, if we price it between 66% and 80% of our normal retail price, that was considered a midline price. If we went below the 60% price, it was considered a budget price. But if we sold it for less than 80% discount, or more than an 80% discount, which would put it down on a physical good, maybe put it in a $1.99 range, we would have to pay you royalties at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of that was to recover manufacturing and distribution costs.
And I'm sure you've had this experience too, but when you start explaining some of these reductions and caveats and all of these things on the royalty rate to an artist, they start getting that deer in the headlights look, and they're off in their own head creating a new piece of music or something. And but honestly, if you look at it from the record label's perspective, you start to understand that the concept of a music business includes both elements. It includes the creative, which is the artist and the creator and the songwriter and the producer, but it also includes the conglomerate, the Sonys of the world, the corporations who really their headquarters are over offshore somewhere, outside of the United States. And they've got shareholders to answer to. They've got investors to answer to. And so when you start talking about paying a royalty on a piece of product, right, you've got to account for those expenses. You've got to account for all of that, which is where the artist just doesn't bridge that gap.
And of course, factored into that is our recording costs. That's R&D. If you're at a corporation, that's research and development.
Right.
So we have R&D of X to produce the record and create the album cover, all that. Then we're going to have an advance to the artist that we have to recover.
We have advertising costs.
Have advertising costs, distribution costs. We have our staff salaries, the SG&A for the company comes into place. And oh, by the way, even back in the day when you were seeing almost $20 retail price CDs, generally speaking, only 10 of that was going to the label, to the distributor, who then took their 15% cut. The rest went to the label, who then had to cover all the costs that we just mentioned.
Right.
And so it's not this idea. When I was teaching distribution at Belmont University, I was telling and showing the grids, I said, this is not the big bad record company screwing people left and right. That does happen, don't get me wrong. But when you start going just through the basic numbers, there's not a lot of profit margin, at least on an album sale, and even lower on a single sale, not a lot of profit margin for the label. They do make it up in volume. And that's why the general percentages are 8 or 9 out of every 10, at least albums, are not profitable. Mm-hmm. But that 1 or 2 can be so profitable. They cover the sins and shortcomings of this other stuff. It's being a label is not for the faint of heart at all.
It is not. And the labels, all of them, all of the recording industry labels are also part of the movie industry and part of other entertainment aspects. Disney, of course, does it all. And then you've got the television ownership coming in. All of those entities have to work together in order to generate dividends for their shareholders. And when you start getting to that level, that's when you understand why some of these seemingly obscure and seemingly oppressive, shall we say, clauses tend to make sense from a business perspective.
They do, and I'll be the first to say I love indie artists and I also love record labels. I like working with both of them. They each have their own unique challenges. But what I do believe, this is my nearly 40 years of being in this business coming out, what I really do believe that when things go sour with a record label, it isn't really about somebody tried to screw you out of money. It's something else. I didn't get to make the record I wanted to make. They wouldn't release the tracks I really thought I wanted to make. They wouldn't work with me on that. Maybe they didn't put enough marketing attention into me, or I feel they didn't. And that's what I'm upset about. But it's never. We had this conversation yesterday about audits, did we not?
We did.
On the phone with somebody.
Yeah.
Have we ever seen an audit come back in our time in this town? Do we know of any instances, maybe one or two, where the actual audit of the royalties came back and the artist was underpaid?
Yeah, your point is very well taken. I mean, there is rarely a time when the dispute or the reason that there's that breakup, termination of the contract, is based on money or somebody deceiving somebody into signing this contract. It's usually something relationship-based or creative input-based. Somebody feels slighted, things of that nature. It's almost always personal.
It really is. I know labels will look at it sometimes and go, hey, even if we're making money, maybe it's not enough money, so we need to take those resources and put them somewhere else. We just don't see that we're going to get where we wanted to go. So it's time for the contract to expire. We're not picking up the option.
Right.
Some artists or labels are going, man, this feels like it's going really, really well. But the artist says, and I've had this experience with one client, but you know what? I don't feel that they really paid attention to me. But look at the success we've had. Yeah, but I didn't really know the people in marketing, and they were doing stuff I didn't really jive with. And even though it was successful, it just didn't feel like we were a real team, and I think I need to make a change. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
But I've yet to experience where it's truly been the fact that, hey, you underpaid me such an egregious amount of money, I can never do business with you again.
Right.
I've yet to find that, honestly.
Well, with that in mind, let me talk about another little, this is kind of a segue back into the old language, right? We've been talking about the various deductions that they would go against the royalties and how they'd carefully calculate out, how much money they're making and all of that. There was a clause in the old exclusive recording agreement, and very frequently you'll find similar concepts in the newer agreements. But when a company pays an artist to go in and make these masters, and then they start distributing those masters, there are times when the sound recording is going to be used or licensed to be used on a flat rate kind of basis. Let's say it's used in a movie, right? Well, there was an old kitchen sink kind of clause in the royalty provision that says company shall credit artist royalty account with 50% of the net amount of that flat rate received by company under each such license. You know where I'm going with this. I can see it in your eyes. This is known as the Eminem clause now, because Eminem sued his label in the beginning of the iTunes days, right? When Apple was coming out with its iPod and it wanted a way to, feed the sales of those. And so it came up with iTunes and it started licensing all these products from the labels. And they were one of the first, I'll give them credit, for licensing and actually paying songwriters and some other things for digital music. But when that happened, Eminem says, well, wait a minute, you're only paying me 10%, my royalty rate on this, but that's a flat rate license you did with Apple. So you owe me some more money. You owe me 50%. And damn if he didn't win.
Yeah. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, because I was a babe back then. I was such a young.
I know you're lying now.
So, correct me if I'm wrong. Part of that argument was the label is sending a master to Apple, who is storing it on their server.
Right.
And then from there, it is being, for lack of a better term, let's call it replicated or duplicated down to the individual digital files that people could buy and access.
Right.
And so on the one hand, and this is where it eventually got to, it came back around to being, well, we'll treat it as a retail sale. But back then, and I think he was correct, honestly. No. you licensed them. You didn't sell them a master and then give them rights to redistribute and make copies and redistribute. You licensed that to them. That is a license. So 50% of every dollar you get from that license for every single download should be mine.
Well, your basic logic is correct. However, the problem, and this is what the labels, of course, argued, they didn't license Eminem's recordings only. They licensed a repertoire. They licensed a bundle of recordings, including hundreds of other artists. So the flat rate that they were getting was not the flat rate that was anticipated in the language of the clause I just talked about. It was a flat rate for their entire catalog. So technically, Eminem got some royalties from the downloads of other artists, and that's how that award shook down. I personally think that decision was an incorrect decision because the judge didn't really understand the music industry. However, I will say that those clauses back in those days were ambiguously drawn. So they could be interpreted against the label because they drafted them.
So the way I get it, and I haven't gone back to read that case. As a matter of fact, I only read the articles. I never actually read the opinions on it. But my understanding was, and I knew what was happening because I worked with labels, or at labels at the time. And so essentially, the rate was 70 cents or 70% of every download would go to the label. That 30% is called an agency fee, basically. So Apple said, hey, we're going to put this up for 99 cents. If you remember, that was the price point. Mm-hmm. I'll round it to $1 for easier math. So 30 cents of that we're going to keep. We're going to send you 70 cents. That was the deal. And he was arguing, you don't pay my royalty off of the 99 cents. You don't pay my royalty rate off of the 70 cents. You give me half of your 70 cents, 35 cents. Because I don't know what his royalty rate was, but it was probably high teens, low 20s at that point, I would imagine. So instead of giving me 25% of your 70 cents, I need 50% of your 70 cents. I thought that was the argument that he won because if you remember, he won, what was it, double-digit millions?
Oh, yeah.
In that ruling?
Yeah.
And I remember there was a point in time, a few years later, I got to a management company, and when I got there, they already had one of our clients doing an audit from their label, which every artist has the right to do. And they were finding all this money, but a lot of it was based upon this Eminem approach, going, wait a minute, all this digital money you have here, downloads and streams that you're collecting, that should be 50%, 50.
No, I get it. I get it. But I guess the ambiguity was in the word license because the license that the label had was a license deal for their catalog. Whereas the argument Eminem was making is exactly what you just articulated, yes. That, it's a 70-30 split and I should be getting 50-50. So that argument ultimately won out, I think, because of the ambiguity in the clause.
But I would think the argument from the label side would have been a harder one to make. Hey, this is a flat rate. Whoa. Your flat rate's a percentage. Your flat rate isn't a dollar amount.
Yeah.
Right? It's a percentage, and
I'm just not sure when that 70-30 split came along. I don't know if it was after the Eminem case or before.
I can tell you it was after the Eminem case.
And I think it was a result of the Eminem case. I think after they were forced to pay Eminem the double-digit millions, then the label said, well, wait a minute, we got to restructure things. And we got to do things differently, and they did.
By the way, every contract now is very explicit about how to handle.
It is much more clear at this point.
New mediums, now known or later created.
Yes, yeah, we've got it covered.
And the term of normal retail channels. Came out in a big way. In normal retail selling channels came out in a big way because again, is a stream a normal retail selling channel? What is now? I mean, that's what it is. So yeah, that would be. So they really revamped the language after this whole fiasco with Eminem,
Yeah.
which was very fascinating to read.
All right, let's go to a different term in the contract now, and the traditional contract, and a term that is still in most contracts with a conglomerate like this, because, as I referred to earlier, ownership of the masters is extremely important to the label in order to recoup the millions of dollars that they invest in making a celebrity well known. And let's explain, I guess, to the audience what that means. Essentially, when you have a piece of recorded music, let's just call it an MP3, what you have is a combination. It's a derivative work. There is a musical composition that gets written by the songwriter. Songwriter owns a copyright in that musical composition. But then the label gets authorizations through a license to record that musical composition, mostly a first use license, to create a sound recording, which is a derivative from the original copyright. When you create a derivative with permission, that gives you, the new owner, the ability to own that sound recording. So by default, that falls to the author or the performer and the engineer and the producer and the musicians who record it. But the record labels institute a series of work made for hire, which allows them to then capture ownership of that sound recording. How has that been affected, Dennis, by the new trend of the democratization of music and artists being able to go out and do their own thing and then solicit labels to do these things? Do you see that changing in some of your deals?
It's become more prevalent to do master licensing deals.
Right.
And those come in all variations and flavors.
Well, explain that basic concept.
On the one hand, and I just did a deal recently with an independent artist signing with a small label, and she is doing her own recording and delivering finished recordings to the label, and they get to exploit and distribute that master for a period of years. This deal was 8 years.
So instead of just licensing the musical composition to be used in a sound recording produced by the record label, she is taking her musical compositions, exercising her own derivative rights, and creating a sound recording that she then owns the copyright to.
Correct.
And then licensing that to the conglomerate.
Correct. And this one was we use conglomerate. It was an independent label, but of significant strength.
Probably still a conglomerate.
And, yeah, true. A common conglomeration of something. And they then own and have full exclusive rights to that recording period. Now, within that, there's a period of time where she can't record for anybody else. She couldn't go and do another record and license it to a second label. No, there is some exclusivity for a period of time through all this as well. And they have an option for the next album and some other things. So we've got that where the artist does everything on their own, creates it, records it, and takes a finished product to the label and does the licensing deal. Then on the other hand, I've been involved with a significant artist who, again, was a license deal, but he had enough leverage that the label is paying really big advance and all recording costs, recoupable, both of those, and all marketing and promotion, and a pretty high royalty rate. Mm-hmm. And they get that license for, I think it's 10 years to do all that because they're putting out a whole lot of money. And they have options on that. So we've seen both of those happen. And unlike the old days where the label will do all that same stuff that we just talked about, but they're going to own the copyright. They're going to own the finished recordings. And in one instance I just dealt with recently, no, we won't do a reversion. Just finished negotiating a small deal with someone. I said, well, hey, this is a legacy artist. And, literally every one of her previous albums had a reversion clause in it, meaning after a certain number of years or assuming it had recouped whatever costs, then the ownership of the copyright in those recordings would revert to her. And they just flat out said, yeah, no, we don't do that. And I found out later the reason they don't do that is that they were bought, which I knew they had been purchased a few years earlier by a, for lack of a better term, a private equity fund.
Mm-hmm.
And the private equity fund said, no. When we buy to keep. We're not looking to revert masters to people.
Well, and here's a good example of what we were talking about earlier. If you're an independent artist and you do have a following and you are making a significant living doing what you love, is it worth it to go to a company that says, no, we won't give you a reversion and we do want to take ownership of the masters? Or in today's environment, is it not better to take what we've referred to earlier in this podcast series as the BOTNA, the best alternative to a negotiated deal? Do you really want that Holy Grail? Do you really want the exclusive recording agreement if you're going to have to give up your creation for eternity? I mean, now we've got options.
Absolutely. Keep in mind that even if the label owns it, you're still tied into your artist royalties, assuming it's an album that's going to recoup.
Assuming you're recouped.
So even down the road, if you ever wanted to do some sort of if you wanted to convey your revenue streams to somebody for a big payday, that's theoretically, you might still have that. But the idea of ownership and ownership of assets and copyrights and recorded masters are assets that you can continue to make money from, more so than just your artist royalty. So it is important, more important even these days, for artists to try to hold on to those the best they can, whether that's, I'm going to just partner with you, I'm going to own it all, and I'm going to deliver my recording. You're going to bring in the other half of marketing and promotion. We'll split everything 50-50, but I own it all. And we'll do that deal, for a 10-year period. Or, other scenarios. It's if you can get the asset, try to. And in today's market, the artists have been more able to hold the asset or some significant portion of that asset better than they ever have.
No, I agree. And much more successful at negotiating those better deals. That said, let's talk a little bit about the fine print. And you and I have this favorite saying, what the large print giveth, the fine print taketh away. And that is nowhere more true than in the exclusive recording agreement of the traditional music industry. There's a lot of fine print that comes back around to haunt you in later years. One example, one of my favorite examples in current culture is the post-term exclusivity. In other words, because you've recorded all this music and given it to the labels to exploit, and they've given you money in exchange for that, they will put in a clause in the fine print that says you're not going to perform these compositions that you recorded under our exclusive recording agreement for any other company or person for a period of, let's say, 5 years, right? Now, you know exactly where I'm going here, don't you?
Oh, yeah.
This is called the Swiftie clause.
Yes. It's tailor-made.
It is tailor-made. Well, it was certainly around long before she was ever a twinkle in her father's eye.
But she leveraged that in such an amazing way.
Well, she tried to. I think, ultimately, she just waited for the clause to expire.
But what did that generate?
Well, it generated, of course, she's a master, I will say, at the marketing. She knows how to get her Swifties to do her bidding. That's great. And she makes a lot of money doing it. But in that case, you got to admit, she wasn't exactly justified in that. Her father helped establish Big Machine.
Oh, no, she
paid to, and she ginned it up. She knew what she was getting into because her father hired good lawyers when she entered the contract with Big Machine that he owned an interest in. I mean, there's a lot of things going on in all of that. But point being, that kind of clause will appear somewhere in the contract.
It does, and it appears that way also in producer agreements.
Oh, yeah.
You cannot or will not produce that track for, usually it's 2 years, maybe 3, and I've seen it try to be longer. there's justifications for a lot of that.
Yeah, we call those
label.
restrictive covenants in contract drafting language,
But when you think about it, if I'm the label and I'm putting money into this recording artist and they're delivering a certain number of masters to me, individual song masters, I want the ability to put that out under that artist's name for the longest period I can to make my money back. Because as soon as we saw with Taylor and what she did when she started putting out Taylor's versions of those records, they dwarfed what was selling on the original versions.
Yeah.
And so you don't want the artist to cannibalize your sales of that song that she recorded or he recorded just because they went to another label and recorded it for them as well and maybe freshened up some stuff.
Well, and that's the business reasoning or logic for having that in there.
Absolutely. And so I get it.
You don't want the sales of the product that you spent millions to promote being diminished by additional product being put out by somebody like Taylor Swift.
But on behalf of the artist client, or even for us, the producer client as well, you want that minimized, that time period.
Negotiate it down as much as you can. That's right. Another example in this restrictive covenant fine print area is an attempt by the label to enforce the delivery requirements we talked about before. There's a minimum amount of delivery. And I've seen clauses that basically talk about if you do not do that, if you don't give us the adequate number of deliveries, then you've got to repay your unrecouped amount. So there, the bank, the label really does begin to resemble a bank, because now you do have to repay them from whatever you do, even if you're working at as a barista in Starbucks after the deal. That's in the fine print.
That's very much in the fine print. You see that a lot in publishing agreements, by the way, where you have a minimum delivery. Say it's a 3-year term for the contract. You're supposed to deliver 12 full songs in that each period.
One per month?
Pretty much one per month, but you only get the credit for the fractional equivalent that you wrote.
That's
so if
correct.
you co-wrote with 2 people, that's 24 songs a year.
Yeah.
If it's 3 people, it's 36 songs a year. But then they add that language that says the term ends in 3 years unless you haven't met your minimum delivery or there's unrecouped monies, in which case it will extend until those 2 pieces are met.
Well, another way they deal with that, particularly in the songwriting situation, because as we know, sometimes, songwriters have 2 times of day, either morning or evening, and they really only work evening. And so, they often fail to meet their delivery requirement of writing songs. So they will put in the fine print something called a suspension clause,
Yes.
which allows them in that event to suspend the term. So as long as you're not delivering songs, the term, if it's a 5-year term, it just kind of suspends. And if it takes you 5 years to deliver another song, now you got another 5 years to live under that contract.
Yeah, I always find it interesting, the difference between recording artists and songwriters. Recording artists and their managers, they're watching those delivery terms pretty closely. How many songs or tracks do we need to deliver by when?
Songwriters, not so much.
You know how many songwriters I've talked to at the end of their contract, and I go, okay, so have you hit your minimum? Well, let me go count them up.
Not exactly.
And then they're light. And I go, dude, and then I had one case where the guy said, oh, wait a minute, I've got like 15 songs that I never turned in. They've been sitting here for a year. Bro, come on, man. And so, well, you got to turn them in, and they got to accept them, and then we get the report from them whether you've recouped your advances or not. So, yeah, that type of language, I know when I'm dealing with a client or their manager, I don't just red line and send them a red line. I go through it with them and I go, look, here on this line, I might not have needed to red line it because that's a term that's not going to come out, by the way. I don't know of any label or publisher that will allow it to come out, honestly. I said, it's not going to come out, but you need to be aware and mark it down in your notes and in your calendar. You've got to deliver this by the end of this term on this contract, or it will extend until you do.
Yeah, but you know full well that songwriter forgot that the minute he walked out your door.
Yes, and that's why you try to put particulars in your own file that says, catch up with Joe Blow over here. Did you turn in all your songs this year?
The last fine print I want to talk about is, I guess, really not so much fine print, but it was. It was in the fine print originally. Then we ultimately put it into a separate section of the contract. But back in the days when Napster sucked the revenue out of the life of the music industry, and labels were literally struggling and trying to figure out how to make some of that money back we've been talking about, investing in these artists. It was difficult when the product wasn't selling because Napster was giving it away for free. So they began to explore fine print that would give them interest in other parts of the touring business, the recording business that was making money. That being the touring, that being endorsement deals that the artist was involved in, that being the music publishing. And they started taking pieces of that pie. That's where we get the name the 360 deal, because the labels were literally taking money of every angle of your business. So tell us a little bit about that, Des. What kind of percentages were we talking about?
Yeah, it's, first of all, I will say, early on in my career at labels, we had these types of discussions, especially when we weren't selling records on a particular artist, but they seemed to be touring well and some other stuff. And there is some truth, I think, that the label doing what they do, helping these artists become quote unquote stars, I'll use that very loosely, that a lot of that is because of what the label has done. So I don't think that it's unjustified for them to want to talk about some of that. The question is, what is it and how much?
Right.
And it has run everything from a piece of every booking agreement that you get, a piece of any sponsorship and endorsement that you get, and it might be a higher percentage if we bring it to the table. Some of the numbers that I've been involved with over the years have usually run somewhere in that 5 to 15%, averaging right around 10, especially on booking. Our argument when I was in management was, well, wait a minute. If the manager gets 15 dealing with this artist day in and day out and making this stuff happen, the agent gets 10%, that's already 25. You get another 10 plus all the record royalties. And by the way, even though an artist is unrecouped, doesn't mean the label hasn't made money. They have. It's just unrecouped at the rate of the artist royalty.
Right.
And so our argument would be, no, 5% is more than enough. But even then, we try to work in a minimum threshold, such as, and I just did one of these in the last couple of months. If the artist is making any booking that is a gross of $7,500 or below, they get nothing. I've seen other ones where it doesn't kick in until on a aggregate basis, it crosses like $250,000 for, that period of time in the year. And at that point, for the rest of the year, it'll go, it'll apply. So it can be sliced and diced in myriad ways. And again, it's not necessarily unjustified. And on the sponsorship, that one in particular, I have no problem if the label brings something to the table and says, hey, we need to get 25% of what we bring to you and you accept. You went out and found it.
No, exactly.
Don't have a problem with it. But if we've got people coming to us or we go out and find something, I have a big problem paying you 25% of that. You didn't do anything for it, really.
Yeah.
But they play in it? Maybe. The great news about all of that is the negotiability of it.
Well, and the thing about that is, even if they didn't bring it to the table, let's say it's $1 million deal, the fact that you were able to get the $1 million deal may have had something to do with the fact that they spent $10 million getting you to that point.
Absolutely.
So there is some justification. Maybe it's not a 25% justification. But.
No, I think the labels do a lot and deserve a lot of credit for helping these artists get the profile that they get. It's not just the talent in the song alone. It is the A&R direction. It's the producer. It's the timing of the release. It's the other stuff the label brings around. It's them funding all this stuff for you. They have a very significant play in this, so I have no problem with that. Taking a piece of everything in a 360-degree fashion, I've never seen that fully. Someone manager joked to me one day, he goes, yeah, I've never seen that, but I've seen a 270, a 135,
Yeah.
57 degree.
Well, you know the old expression, now we're just quibbling over price.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Thank you for leaving out the first half of that joke.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No,
That would have gotten us in
didn't want to
trouble.
go there.
That would have gotten us in real trouble.
Well, audience, I think we've probably given you enough to digest that expression we have, what the large print giveth, the fine print taketh away. It certainly is applicable here. We're going to take a short break, and then we'll be back with some walkaway points. Remember to subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts, or send us a note at questions@musicrowdealmakers.com, or call us at 800-DEAL-MKR. Dennis, what can we let the audience take home with them today, the walkaway points?
If you're looking to do a deal, call a good lawyer.
I like that. Yes.
That's the first one. These contracts, the language can get very dense.
Oh, seriously.
And very, in some cases, somewhat opaque if you're not
I think
reading
the
it right.
largest contract I ever got was 160 pages.
Oh my God. I haven't done that. I've seen 65 and 70. I've never seen that. Holy
Well,
cow.
65 to 70 is more typical. But this was a 360 deal, and it had the attachments and everything else. So it was essentially 3 or 4 contracts.
I mean, I do a lot that's in the 20 to 30 page range, a lot of those. I've seen some smaller, but boy, 100 and some odd pages. Holy cow.
Well, but to your point, you know, for the artist out there, and you know, you need a team. And one of the first people you should get on your team is a lawyer. You might have to pay some money to engage a lawyer, depending on your relationship with them, but it is worth it. Have a lawyer on your team that understands the business and can help guide you toward what you call the vision early on in this podcast.
There are a lot of managers who are great managers, and they actually do a great job of negotiating the macro points.
Well, and that's another important part of the team.
Yes. But
they don't take the place of a lawyer.
They don't, and they shouldn't, honestly. But they do a really great job of the macro points. Now, many times I will say, dude, you way undershot where that could have been. Yeah, but we've agreed I'm not going to renegotiate those points. Okay, fine. We'll just work on the rest of the language part of it. But I'm working on a deal right now that's very significant dollars, and I'm working very closely with the manager and the artist, that they will talk, and then they call me, and the 3 of us will talk, and we'll work through, is that a good number? Is that a good time schedule, et cetera. But just yesterday, I was on the phone with them, looking at this latest red line from the company who sent it over, and all they wanted to talk about were those big numbers. Right. And I said, that's great. Here's 3 or 4 other notes. This line is written in here. One said, that actually called them partners in this deal. I said, we can't have that in there, just so you know. And they immediately went, oh, no. I go, yeah, because as we know, with partnership law, if you act as a partnership, you're a de facto partnership. And
right.
And in this case, it actually said we're a partner. That means the other company could go and make some commitments, walk away from it, and our guy might be on the hook.
That's right.
So just stuff like that a manager doesn't look at as closely, because they're looking at the big numbers. How much money, how many songs, if you will, when do I have to deliver them? When do I own the master or not? That type of thing.
Now, that's a good piece of advice. Get a lawyer. One thing I would say too, at the risk of, well, I'll say this: remember, even if you're an artist, remember that it's the music business. Now, before you go to your happy place, let me say this: I'm only talking about developing a mission statement, right? You talked about it in context of a vision. Right. Well, every company has a mission statement. You talked about your distant relative Walt, right? His mission statement for the Walt Disney Company. You know what it was?
I have read it and I forgot it.
It's to make people happy.
Yeah, that's right.
Isn't that amazing? He wanted, when you go to his parks, he wanted to make you happy. And I think the company for the most part is probably still achieving that mission.
Well, they can make me happy if they made me part of the closer family for some money.
Even
some free park tickets, man.
Yeah, exactly. Just free park tickets. That's all we want.
But no, you're right about the mission statement. That drives your whole focus, your whole methodology has to be toward that mission statement.
Right. You don't have to get involved in numbers. You can get accountants for that. You don't have to get involved in the law. You can get lawyers for that. But understand your passion, your vision, and make a mission statement that you can live out and achieve. If you can do that, you're going to be successful.
I agree. The only other thing I would add to what we've just said is approach these with as little emotion as possible. We talk about this being the Holy Grail and the exhilaration and exuberance that comes with getting that first deal and
Right.
telling all your high school buddies about it and all that good stuff, right? But the moment you get too emotional, this is where a lawyer needs to come into play to help temper all that. You lose
perspective.
you lose perspective on is taking this level of advance good now or not. And I've had that debate with people. And they go, well, I just don't want to have to repay all that. What do you mean you don't want to? You want to wait 5 years to earn that amount of money out, or just take it now? No interest, no obligation to repay it if they let you go. They just thought, yeah, but I just don't want that. I don't want the debt. Well, it's not debt.
Yeah.
They don't. So they look at it from an emotional, not fully logical perspective. And we've got a ruckus in the hallway.
Yeah, somebody's celebrating Thanksgiving early.
It's not even 5 o'clock, man. They can't be celebrating too much, but hey, okay. So hopefully not many people are hearing that. So
Yeah.
but anyway, but no, I do think emotion gets too tied up into this because of how you like to call it, the Holy Grail
Yeah.
of a contract.
No, I do too, and even in today's culture, it is tempting to have that perspective on something like an exclusive recording agreement, and I think you're exactly right. You've got to keep your cool about that. Don't get emotional. Don't think this is it, because then you don't have an alternative. You haven't explored all of your options.
Well, and then don't get sidetracked by thinking just because they will not give you a certain concession that they don't believe in you anymore.
Right.
They're looking at it from a very pragmatic business perspective. This is what we need to work within our system and to make our numbers and to help you be successful, we believe. So because they won't give you everything that you want, if you can take the emotion out of it, as we said at the top, view this as a means to an end, this is what I'm trying to get to, then you can look at it and say, okay, I understand why they can't give me that, but if I can't get that, can they give me this instead?
Exactly.
But you can only do that if you're not emotional about it.
And I think that's a good lesson for all of business audience. And I think we'll leave you on that note. We hope you have a great 2 weeks. We'll see you again mid next month with another episode. And we hope you tune in. Appreciate it.
Music Row Dealmakers is a production of Shrump, Disney and Associates, recorded on location on Music Row, the heart of Music City, Nashville. Subscribe to future episodes wherever you enjoy your podcasts.
Every time the music plays, our head starts bobbing.